G'day, it's Jamie and welcome to Where's My Yowie. Today I'm reading an old newspaper article about Yowies on the St George's River in Sydney in the late 1700s, so we'll get into it. This was published in the Sydney Mail and New South Wales Advertiser on Wednesday the 13th of December 1905, titled Aboriginal Fables by Robert Kaleski. Years ago, when I was a little boy living in the ghost-haunted old district lying between Campbelltown and Liverpool, I had the fortune to fall sick one bright spring, and the misfortune to be nursed by an old Aboriginal woman with a genius for fairy lore. In my convalescence, she improved the time by telling me such tales as she thought suitable to a nervous patient. I think I see her now sitting on the back kitchen step, imbibing the warm sunlight and a full pipe, telling her stories and heartening me so that I dared not go out to let down the slip rails for the cows if it were near dusk. Here, as she would tell them between puffs, are her two favourites. The Little Hairy Man. When my mother was a young woman, there weren't no white people in this country at all. Everyone was Aboriginal, just like me. Then my mother was married to an Aboriginal man and lived with him in a little hut about a mile down the river from where we do now, down at a place they calls the Half Moon, where the river bends like a horseshoe. And her husband used to be away pretty often for days and days, fishing and hunting, and she used to be left all alone, only she had her dogs always with her to catch her meat. And in those days there was a lot of little men used to be about this river. They had terrible big hairy heads and long teeth like boar's tusks. They used to eat anything they did find dead in the bush, and they'd hang about the Aboriginals' camps to try and steal the children from the women to eat. That's why an Aboriginal man will never go about in the dark, afraid of bunyips and the little hairy men. One day, when Mother was out after a wallaby, she comes on one's tracks, fresh, and she hurried home, 'cause she had her young baby on her back, and it was late in the afternoon. She got to the hut and lit her a big fire, and called the dogs in beside her, and she blocked up the door so nothing could get in. And there she sat till about midnight, listening, and everything was so still. She could hear the lapping of the river and the wild birds flying overhead. Just then she heard the little hairy man come pit-pat, pit-pat along the sandy track to the hut, and he came close up to the door, and the dogs began to growl. Then he tried the door, and he couldn't get in. Then he crept round, trying for a weak spot, and the dogs would follow him around, smelling and growling, so Mother knew where he was. The little baby began to cry. Outside she could hear the mopokes calling, and the breathing of the little hairy man. At last he found a hole, and pushed his head and arms in, and gnashed his big teeth at the baby. Then the dogs went for him. He had a big waddy in his hand, and he fought the dogs, and they fought him. Mother, she picked up a big stick, red from the fire, and tried to blind him, but he was too cunning to let her get close enough. Mother never knew how long they fought. It seemed years to her. She always said the dogs tore him so that, at last, after he'd killed two, he turned and ran away, back screeching into the bush, and Mother watched and fed the fire till daylight. She was going out then to make for the main camp, but she looked about at first and saw the little hairy man planted back in the bush watching. So she stopped till dinner time, and her husband come home. Then they struck for the big camp, and all the men there went out with her husband, and they tracked the little hairy man to his nest in the swamp and speared him there. And there was never one come on the river after that. So the woman lost no more babies. The story of the white bird. There's a clearing on the green hills, back of Ingleburn. In the old days, the Aborigines used to fight all their battles there. You can go now and look about and nearly always find an old stone tomahawk there or a spearhead any day. One day, Father was hunting on the old ground. He was creeping up close to a wallaby to spear it, and there flew up in front of him a white bird. He'd never seen one like it before. 1 minute it looked white, the next grey, and the next black, then back to white again. It flew past in front of him, fluttering. He left the wallaby and followed it till it perched on a big stone in the middle of the clearing. When it lit there, next second it was gone. In its place stood a tall man, a warrior, spears in his left hand, throwing stick and boomerang in his right. He looked at Father and pointed to the east. Then he threw his spears and boomerang away and gave a great cry. Father said it went through him like a knife. Then he pointed to the ground at Father's feet again and melted away like a puff of wind. There was neither warrior nor bird, only the brown stone on the plain. And that same year, Father said they saw the first white man. The end. Wow, what an amazing story. That must have been really freaky having them about in those days. And that's like before white men came to Australia, so we're looking late 1700s. And like some white men came here in the 1778, so it's a bit before then. But like super interesting, like, and they were saying there was lots of little men about the river in those days. They had terrible big hairy heads, long teeth like boar's tusks, and like he was carrying a waddy, the one that had attacked the hart, which would have been just absolutely terrifying, having one trying to get at you like that. And they used to eat like anything they'd find in the bush that was dead or alive, and they used to try and steal the children. And like that fight she had, that must have been just so scary and freaky, and like I feel sorry for the dogs that died, but good thing she had more than two so that they could fight it off. And then the story about the white bird, that's like really amazing. That's really interesting to hear stories like that. Okay, that's it from me. I'll get back to you all next time. Bye.